Aaron. But a disclaimer, Corinth, the first city, is not mine. I reviewed that book.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't write that book, but just to make the record correct here. Well, thank you for the introduction. I appreciate that very much. But there are a couple of things I should say before I get underway. And that what you are about to see today is solely upon the shoulders of Charles Williams. That had he not offered me this subject quite some time ago, this never would have happened. I might also, well, not might, I must underscore that this book is a collaborative effort. There are 3 of us who have authored this, and we divided it up. I'm responsible for the architecture. Catherine Vanderpool is responsible for the sculpture, and Carolyn Roncalli is responsible for the inscriptions. Now, in framing this out, I deliberately had us all not talk to one another while we were doing our individual research. And the idea is that I didn't want any one of us to influence the others as we were proceeding. Curiously enough, or maybe not curiously at all, we've all ended up at the same spot. And so rather than big controversy coming up throughout this book, what we found is some very decided similarities and with a very pronounced conclusion that is consistent throughout. Okay, now, just as a quick refresher, of course, Corinth and Athens, both in antiquity and in today, are not far apart. With the relatively new national highway, it's a little over an hour drive from Athens to Corinth. That was not so in the past. And Corinth was both a famous city in ancient Greece and was a key player in the merchant and colonial expansion of Greece, starting in the late geometric period. And if you believe the pottery record, Corinth was really perhaps even in the lead of the activity that was going on across the Mediterranean and whatnot. It was well, this is debated, it was attacked and overthrown by the general Mummius in 146. And at first originally thought, at least by Roman historians, that the site was abandoned for the most part until it was refounded by Julius Caesar in 44 BCE. Current research shows that it was not completely abandoned, and I think it's largely because of how significant it was as a trading node, but that's a different story. So anyway, what you're looking at here is a plan of the Roman Forum. We know much, much more about Roman Greece than we know about Roman Corinth than we know about Greek Corinth. I know Chris Pfaff is busily trying to rectify that, and with some limited success, but stay tuned. So the Julian Basilica was located at the east end of the Roman Forum, and you can see marked by the arrow here. And from this nice overhead view done by James Herbst, the architect at Corinth right now, the basilica, or at least what there is quite visible. However, it is quite thoroughly robbed out. It began excavations. Well, the very first year of excavations by the Americans at Corinth was in 1896. They dug a trench over the south aisle of the basilica and the north end of the adjacent southeast building. And in their ranking system, they rated it as third in priority. So the area sat idle until 1914, when this activity begins. And of course, methodologies then and now are significantly different. At the end of 1914, this is what they'd accomplished. Modern ground line is about 6 meters above the floor of the basilica. I don't think there's an excavation in the world now where you're going to see results like this after about 3 months of effort. But anyway, this is what happened then. The plan was quite obvious, fairly early on, and that what it is as you can see, a rectangle within a rectangle. All right. Well, It is also clear, though, that what is preserved and in situ, in place, is no more than about 12% of the total building structure. And worse than that, none of it stands above the level of the cryptoporticus. And you should understand it's the basement. So we have nothing in place from the main story up. Here's the problem. Okay. Now, there were some strong clues that were very, very helpful. We're looking here at the east wall of the basilica, and that is the Romans were considerate enough to build in a consistent block size, at least for the majority. And I won't bother you with the metrical equivalence of this, but it's 2 Roman feet by 4 Roman feet. This proves significant. Because of that, and just simply even by counting blocks, we had a very regular plan that was quite obvious from the start of 130 Roman feet long, 80 Roman feet wide, and for that inner rectangle, 40 by 90 Roman feet. In other words, what they had set out was that they're working in a module of 10 Roman feet. This became critical in putting the building back together, because what they liked to do in plan was also continued in elevation. So this was extremely helpful in trying to get the building back together. Okay, so from this old photograph, another key feature was quite prominently displayed then when this was all nice and clean in 1931, where you can see that spaced, though there's one missing here at a regular interval, were plinths, and we're now down in the basement, and here they are plotted out here. What these are, and this comes from a couple of different sources of information, but one is a series of bell capitals, which gave me the approximate height of the capital and the upper diameter, and from the upper diameter, we could restore the lower diameter. What we were looking at on those plinths is it's supporting a girder, a wooden girder, that ran the length of all 4 aisles, which helped support the joists for the main floor above. And then from this, and from finding key blocks, which showed actually the sockets for the height of the joists, I was able to restore how tall those were and then figure out how far the main floor was above ground level, at least in the 1st century Common Era when it was built. 2 other blocks, and there are very, very few from this course, were also extremely helpful. And what you're looking at, I think you can see, is that this is the bottom of a window block down into the cryptoporticus. These happen to have been, well, this is the better preserved one, at least you can get some idea here, the drawing of the other one, of the window, and these are the sockets for the joist anchors. So this block was both the bottom of a window and then also where the joists were anchored into the walls. From this, and I was able to deduce the regular spacing of the joist plan, that this is how the joists were spaced along the east wall, with every other pair with a window to the outside. From this, I was able to extrapolate a joist plan for the main floor. And now, again, this is all, step by step, we're getting this thing back together. So I now know there's the basic outline of the main floor. There were also a series of column drums that had been present from 1914 forward. You can see 3 of them here in the south aisle. Here are remains of others that are up to the west of the basilica. And this is actually number A. This is Chris Hayward, a geologist from the UK who worked at Corinth and the Corinth quarries for a while. The reason he's here is he's exactly 6 English feet tall. So this gives you a good scale as to what these column drums are like. Now, it was important that there are, in fact, 2 of these where the bottom diameter can be restored, and this happens to be 3 Roman feet. From that, and from elements I found still in the south aisle of fragments of an Ionic capital and fragments of the Ionic base, we can restore that, at least in the southwest corner, that what there was along the nave, that's that inner rectangle, were columns of the Ionic order standing roughly 30 Roman feet high. Okay, this is quite helpful. And so just laying this out in plan, here's what we have then for this inner rectangle, the nave. Well, also extremely helpful for this was a series of blocks that had been excavated in the 1914 season. And we're looking at two of them here in the photograph, and then this is the drawing of the three elements here that are preserved. What these are archivolts, or in fact, what they are, windows. Okay, archivolt is the technical term for the arches above it. Okay, now there was another block that Charles Williams recognized and found out by the Bema out in the Roman Forum, which is the Keystone Block or a Keystone Block for this series. The importance here is that even up at the window level, they're still holding to this basic block height. So the module is still in place, is what I'm telling you, as the building's still being put up, even up to where we get to the windows, which is up at the roof line. And in fact, if we put various elements together, this gives you some idea of what the clerestory or the window level looked like, I'm sorry. Other key elements to this was found built into a vault that was later added in the south aisle are engaged columns. And these are just two of the series. We weren't going to extract these, but there was enough there that I could get the approximate diameter. And that proved interesting because the diameter of those engaged columns matched the diameter of these two different engaged bases. Okay, you'll notice they're of different detail. The curious thing is that, well, this one has been cut back, but the profile is very well preserved. This one has not been cut back. More of the profile is there, but it's also been banged up. What these are, in fact, are the engaged bases for the clerestory. This one, the more battered one, was to the exterior. This one, which had been cut back, for the interior. More about that later. So from that, what I was able to determine was that we're looking at a series of cruciform piers that formed the clerestory. So now we've got a window plan. And just to repeat, here we are with the elements again. Okay, now there are some other key elements because now we've got the windows, but we don't really know what happens between, the main floor level and the windows. Well, there are two blocks of the same series. Both of them are pilasters. One is the pilaster capital, that's over here. The other is the pilaster base. And I might also point out that they're still holding to the standard block height and the block width. Okay. From this, I can deduce that the southwest corner of the building, in fact, was a Corinthian pilaster. And this was accepting that it's going to hold to the standard block height. What this is 10 of these blocks high. In other words, 10 Roman feet. Okay. These two cornice blocks were also very significant. One, they're the same series. This one here, though this is badly done, the drawing's probably better for you. You can see that this preserves the profile of the block. You can also see that the angle here up at the roof is very shallow. This is only 9 degrees. So this block has the same 9 degrees, but what's significant here is that there are parts of two of the sockets for the rafters up in the roof. Now, this distance here is about 49 centimeters. The difficulty is with this, you can't restore your rafters because all you know is the spacing of the rafters. You don't know how thick your rafters were. Well, Charles Williams and I were working down in the architectural elements division in the old museum and recognized that these two pieces joined together. What we're looking at, this is the cyma, which was up at the roof line. And I think in terms of it's a gutter is essentially what it is. And broken off is a lion head spout, which would fit here. Now, what's important about this is even though this cyma is not complete, we do have the center of it. And from this, I was able to restore that the width of this originally would have been 62 to 63 centimeters. That then, if you tie back into the span we have for the joist, gave me a width of roughly half a Roman foot wide for the rafters, and those rafters falling with a space of 49 centimeters between the two. From that, I can offer you a rafter plan to put this building back together. All right. Down in this corner here of the south aisle. Oh, I'm sorry, got a little bit ahead of myself. There are vestiges out here of two porches. Okay, one out in the forum level. Okay, here's another. And another over here where now this apse is much, much later. That's not original to the building. Okay, and from this, if I threw it all together, this is what the forum side facade of the basilica looked like in early first century Common Era with a porch. Now, what I want to point out here is that true Roman style, okay, the building stands on a podium, but this is a particularly high podium. This is over 4 meters tall, rising up above the forum. The building itself rises up to the top of the roofline over 17 meters. So you have to understand that down at this east end of the forum, it was dominated by this Julian Basilica. Okay, this is all quite deliberate. There's where I thought we were going, and I skipped that step. Okay, down in this corner of the south aisle is the remains built into a much later wall. You'll have to trust me on this a little bit. What we're looking at is an engaged Doric capital. You can see some of the fluting over here, some of the plaster stuck onto it. Okay, this is quite helpful because though the outside of the building fell into place before the inside, this is quite helpful in determining the inside. So finding that, I started looking around, and sure enough, there was a Doric cornice of appropriate dimensions and part of a triglyph metaplate block. Okay. Now, critical to this all are two blocks that were both the wall crowns on the interior of the building, but they also, and I had no notion until really discovering these blocks, they have sockets here, anchors for coffer beams. So up at the crown of the wall we have a really pretty simple profile here, but there are also beam coffers. What we look at then, we can restore from there. Again, remember we're staying to this module, a coffer plan for the basilica. And from the elements that recovered then, we're down at the cryptoporticus with the girder supporting the joist. Here we have the engaged Doric column with the Doric architrave and frieze. And above this, here are the cruciform piers with the Corinthian to the outside, Ionic to the inside, and one of the beams for the coffers going across. So the interior west wall would have looked something like this in antiquity. And there was more, I'm afraid. There were some orthostate blocks, and you can see two of them lined up here, and this one here is the one that I've drawn over here. Structurally, these cannot support much, so they're mostly put up to face. I suspect what they were facing was at least originally a wooden framework, also a fluted column drum, and pieces of Ionic capital fragments that are suitable in dimension to fit that column drum. What I think we're looking at, and I don't have time to go to all of the rationale behind this here, is that in the south aisle, there was a dais. And that dais was with Ionic columns standing on it. What you see dotted here is a pass-through into the adjacent southeast building, which is the subject of my next Corinth volume. So stay tuned on that. But this is significant. And this is where things started getting very interesting as far as my understanding of this building. I didn't go looking for this, but the evidence was there. And what I needed to do was try to figure out, well, what is the significance of this here? Well, there's more. And that is, there was a refurbishing of the building done during the Antonine period. And where everything had been done in the local stone, commonly referred to as poros, and plaster and paint, during the Antonine period, they come in and they completely refurbish the building in marble and fine stones, including adding Rousseau bays here with detached Corinthian columns. They redo this dais, also in Corinthian. And you can see what the piece is looking like. So here was the original building. Here's the redesigned building. If you'll remember when we were talking about the cruciform piers out here, this is the one that was boxed in. Okay, the nose was cut off and boxed in to put in these pergamene style capitals up above the Corinthian capitals. So what the dais is redone to look like is something along these lines, where you can see two of the orthostates placed here, and there's a plinth that goes with a base, and so on and so forth. Okay, so looking through the building in the Antonine period, what we have is two porches, one coming in off the Forum, one coming in off a road to the east, and here we are down with the cryptoporticus, and then the main floor with our clear story windows. All of this was becoming quite suggestive, but it wasn't until I asked a former student of mine, Janet Juarez, who now is employed by an architectural firm with a branch office in Los Angeles, who took my pen and ink drawings and did a little wizardry. And so what we should understand is that this is what the basilica looked like in both phases, down at the east into the Forum. And inside, it gets even more impressive. Just for the heck of it, we're down in the cryptoporticus. Here is along the west wall coming in from the porch. This is during the original period, which would have been the Augustan period. Looking a little bit towards the nave, here are the Ionic columns here. And looking through the nave down towards the south end and the dais. Okay. Just to give you a rough notion of what it looks like during the Antonine period, and again, this is Janet's work. Now, this is a little bit deceptive, and that is that there are numerous marbles and colored stones that would have been used in some sort of a pattern, both on the floor and on the walls. I decided it was better to just block this in white so you could see what we know for certain, rather than biasing you by putting in some imposed design that I really have no means to support whatsoever. But you can see how different the basilica looks, even though structurally it never changed. Okay. Now, it is this feature down here at the south end that really caught my attention. And from investigations in basilicas, where I compiled a catalog of every known Roman basilica I could find, and it was numbering somewhere around, well, with restorable dimensions, I got to about 116 basilicas. Now, this was some time ago. And what this turns out to be, and this is where the Imperial Cult starts coming in, is that proportionally and for purpose, this seems to be modeled after Vitruvius's basilica at Fano. And now, though there's a nice verbal description of it by Vitruvius himself, we do not have the actual building. There's been a debate about how it should all be put together, just reading what Vitruvius says. This is where I think most scholars are right now, something along these lines. What is key about this, though, is what Vitruvius says he does to why he does this particular building. And that is, it was to emphasize an ides, a shrine, a temple of Augustus. And that's this here. He also specifically states that the proportions of this building are different than what was common frequently. Now, one of the benefits of me doing this database of all the known basilicas I could get, prior to Vitruvius, the most common proportions were a ratio of roughly the width of about 0.39 of what the length was. The Fano Basilica, it's somewhere around 0.61 to 0.62. This is what we have in the Basilica at Corinth, the Julian Basilica. But in fact, what I saw was that starting with the Basilica at Fano, and this table is organized in square meters, so from smallest to largest, is that it was not alone, nor was Corinth Julian Basilica the only other example, but in fact, there were 14 others, and all being built in the 1st century or so, Common Era, at the very, very end of the 1st century BCE, but largely the Augustan Julio-Claudian period, and then it stops. In fact, the last known example I could find was the South Basilica in Corinth. Well, things have gotten even more curious. Aaron mentioned my work down at the harbor at Lecchio, the main harbor of Corinth. Of course, I have to find another basilica. And curiously enough, this basilica down at Lecchio is another Fano-style basilica. This time with clearly an apse. Here's the puzzle here, though. The building that is best preserved dates to the Flavian period, perhaps Neronian, but I'm more inclined to Flavian myself. And it's, what we have here is this apse instead of an exedra. There's an earlier apse that dates to the Augustan period. There may, in fact, be 2 basilicas here, one rebuilt after the earthquake of 78 Common Era by the Flavians, which is, by the way, at the same time that the South Basilica up the hill in Corinth is built. So now we're getting curious, because of what are certainly 15 known examples, 3 of those examples are in Corinth. Well, here's where the rest of the playing field comes in. So I mentioned that how Vitruvius specifically says that the reason he designed this basilica was to honor Augustus. Well, from the work of Kathy Vanderpool, and I certainly cannot do justice to her work in the amount of time I have available here, there are no fewer than 10 statues of the Julio-Claudian family, and perhaps as many as 12. She's not sure because some are very, it's quite fragmentary. Perhaps the most famous are these 3, where we have Augustus himself and his grandsons, whom he adopted as his sons and heirs, Lucius and Gaius. Now, I want you to notice that you'll see there's a break here of Augustus's neck, and he's missing his feet. He was found in destruction debris from the collapse of the building when it went down late in the 4th century Common Era. With the exception of this cracked arm, which I hate to say, I believe happened from an excavator who stood on his arm before it was revealed. But you will notice Gaius's neck is intact, as are his ankles. Lucius's neck is intact, but you'll notice there's big pieces of him missing. Well, I think I've got an understanding. So here's where Augustus was found. Over here was Gaius and Lucius. Lucius, unfortunately, was found built into a medieval period wall. Here's Gaius being found in 1914, and you can see here's the fresh break on his arm. He was quite clearly and deliberately brought down into the cryptoporticus and laid on his back and forgotten. I suspect that the same had been done with Lucius, except he was found and reused as building material. Also famous, and I know John Pellini showed up. I'm sure he'll tell us about this better than I can. This figure is debated. It is a Nero. If it's Nero, likely not, but quite recognizable as a Julio-Claudian prince. Kathy Vanderpool has identified this piece as Julius Caesar holding a spear. he was found in front of the dais, which in fact I think was a tribunal, thrown down a hole. And my thought is if you're taking a statue to throw it down a hole, you're probably not going to take it too much farther than the nearest hole. So I think it's safe to assume that he was somewhere down there in that south aisle. This piece was found built into a later wall in the east aisle and just a little bit south of where the Gaia statue was, but as I said, built into a wall. Kathy identifies this piece as Germanicus, brother of Tiberius. This that she thinks is a Claudius torso in the style of Claudius at Olympia. So these are just kind of the highlights, but there is a very marked presence of the Julio-Claudian family inside this building. It doesn't stop there. And just as I cannot, well, here's just to give a plot of where these all were, but just as I cannot do justice to Kathy's work, I cannot do justice to Carolyn's work. There are a number of dedications to the imperial family, almost without exclusion, to the Julio-Claudian period. We have pieces of an altar to Augustus, which was found in the same destruction debris as the Augustus statue. We also have, and again, this has been debated, there are at least 3 people dedicated here. The one that really stands out to me is that this is to the gens Augusta, not Augustus, but Augusta. And this is something of a rarity, but 3 more members of the Julio-Claudian family. We have a dedication to the Newman and the Genius of Augustus in here. Okay. And so the Newman and Genius of Augustus was found over here. The one with the gens Augustus over here. Here's the altar. What you can see is that in general, these are clustered in the south end, with the exception of Gaius and Lucius. Gaius and Lucius, Carolyn associates with this dedication to the Caesars Augustus. And for a number of different reasons, which I can't really get into completely here, letter form is some. She has found parallels in Asia Minor for this too, is that this inscription was found up in the north aisle. My understanding of this is that we should probably understand that Lucius Gaius in the inscription stood opposite this tribunal up in the north aisle, facing down to where Caesar was standing up on the tribunal. And we should assume, I think, even though Augustus was found in later, much later debris, that it was probably framed by statues, the statues of Augustus and Germanicus, and with other members of the imperial family down here. Now, why I said that we did this all individually is that everyone came to the conclusion that we're looking at a venue for the imperial cult. I'm not going to tell you this was the only venue for the imperial cult in Corinth, but I will suggest that it was a pretty predominant one, that the number of statues dedicated or of the imperial family in Corinth is only surpassed by the number of statues in the theater. And I think I said that Mary Sturgeon is here. She might be able to straighten us out on that. As far as imperial dedications, that this is the highest concentration in Corinth, with the theater being a very, very close second. I think there's one more in the Julian Basilica. So what I'm starting to see now, and though the specifics of the Julian Basilica are coming to a close, that what we should understand is that I think much like what Vitruvius tells us for his basilica at Fano, that what you saw from the basilica with his Ides Augusti, you could look out across the forum to the temple of Jupiter Maximus. I strongly suspect that Temple E is the Corinthian Capitoline structure. And though the alignment is not perfect, that's a whole nother discussion. I think that this was very much consistent with what Vitruvius lays out. So what I'm seeing now from building, from what we've found in the Julian Basilica and now finding parallels elsewhere, that Vitruvius's basilica at Fano was not just a one-off, that it was a trend setter, And it really became one of the prime movers for establishing the imperial cult, especially here in Corinth, but as we know that it was not limited to Corinth. So for whatever purpose, or whatever the thought was here in Corinth, whether they were trying to curry favor with Rome, well, I'm not so sure about that, but I wouldn't be surprised, because I might remind you that Corinth had a knack of choosing the wrong side when it came to Roman politics. They first sided with the assassins of Julius Caesar, and Antony and Octavian put them down. And then when Augustus, Octavian, and Antony start mixing it up, Corinth once again chose Antony. So it may be, with this basilica being built somewhere between the years of 2/1 BCE to roughly 8 CE, that this was a conscious attempt by the Corinthians to reconcile with the imperial family, Augustus in particular. The building record across the forum is consistent with this, that the Julian Basilica is the first Roman building to go up in the so-called Roman Forum. We've got a 40-year blank out in what comes to be the Roman Forum until this basilica comes in, and at the opposite end of the forum, in the southwest corner, a temple to Venus. It's hard to tell which one of those comes in first. After that, then building in the forum area just explodes. And very quickly, by the time we get to Nero, it's a very, very different place than it had been previously. So what comes next is me trying to unravel just what is going on with basilicas and the imperial cult. But I think we've got a good start here from Corinth and the Julian Basilica. And with that, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Paul. That's a wonderful talk, and I am totally jealous at those illustrations. What amazing reconstructions. They're beautiful.
As I said, these are from Janet Juarez, and she does just magic as far as I'm concerned. I'm a big fan of pen and ink drawing, but there is a life here that I just can't do. So.
It is absolutely remarkable. While we're waiting for folks, and maybe, we do have a good audience here, so maybe to keep some sort of, order to it and people not having to step on each other trying to ask questions, they could just hit in the chat or raise their hand, and maybe we can see them, and then that way track who wants to ask something. I have a sort of general question for those of us who are not classical archaeologists. In the category of basilicas, this building, is the appropriate label temple? What is it functioning as per se, and how would we imagine this in the life of Corinth?
That's a very good question, Aaron. And that traditionally, before this and before Fano, nearly every Roman town of any size had a basilica. And the most common uses for it was that they would use them for a law court. And they were also used for business purposes. And you shouldn't imagine people inside selling sausages and sandals. It was more negotiations of, okay, I'm bringing 4 ships in from Alexandria full of grain, that sort of thing. So, but it was more a civic hall than anything else. And what happens here, though, and there is an interesting article by a French scholar, Jean-Michel David, who tracks the evolution of the basilicas in the Julio-Claudian period, well, beginning with Augustus, and how more and more you see the images of the imperial family and dedication being drawn in. And so with this as a venue for law courts, then there's sort of this synergy going on of where the judge seated is both being empowered by all this imagery of the imperial family around him, but also it's being underscored that he's the agent of the imperial family. So it's an interesting question, and were this building not such a wreck, I might be able to answer this more completely, but I think that's the best I can do now.
Okay, I'll acknowledge John Papadopoulos' hand here and let him ask his question.
Thank you, Paul. Great talk. Just wanted to ask, in your reconstruction drawings of the dais and of the porches, I noticed some variable intercolumniations. And I noticed a little in the presumed plan of Vitruvius's Fano Basilica.
I'm sorry, John, you were breaking up, but I think what I heard is that you're asking about how intercolumniations can vary. Is that correct? Or why they vary? Uh-oh, now it's just silence.
Yeah, it's
okay.
here the whole hour, and now it's going to break up.
Okay. Yes, where the Greeks were far more precise in this. The Romans were a little more forgiving, but what they did like to do, and the Greeks started in on this too, is that in particular, that center intercolumniation is very often widened. And for a thing like this, here looking at the tribunal, by opening that up, that then makes the statue behind more visible. Out on the porch, by opening it up, it makes the entrance wider and more accessible. Another place where, and I don't know if you caught this, and you may have said this, and I just didn't hear you too, that for the spacing of the columns in the nave, Roman basilicas tend to favor having 4 columns on the short end, regardless of what the rest of the intercolumniation is. And I think that's because they're emphasizing what is opposite that short end of the nave, here, a dais. There is another occurrence of variation on the plan of the nave when you got to the spaces at the long ends. And that is because of the use of the module. By putting a module of 10 Roman feet, that corner is both drawn in about half a column wide, okay, or down, and also in. But there's a reason for that. And that is, if you notice the rafter plan, it's a hip roof. To draw the 45-degree angle, from, the beam carrying the 45-degree angle in, it wouldn't catch the column capital on if it were placed so that it was spaced as all of the others, okay? So it's pulled in so that it can support the hip coming in. And so that's why it might look a little funny, but we're talking about 3 meters. And I suspect that, this is kind of like curvature at the Parthenon. You never notice it until somebody first points it out to you, and then you never forget it, and you always see it. I would suspect that to the casual visitor here, you wouldn't even notice myself. But I hope I answered some of what you asked, John. I'm sorry, but I couldn't hear you. But...
John Polini.
Yeah, hi. Great talk, Paul. And I really like the way you constructed the whole thing and, so that you saw how the building evolved. I thought it was really good. About the religious nature of these buildings, it's usually set up Roman basilicas, of course, with civic buildings, but that's not true, of course, because you do have, as we have here, evidence for the Imperial Cult. Also, you have to remember where the praetor or the judge sat. That had to be consecrated. It is a templum, technically, because you cannot conduct legal business without being on consecrated ground. This is why the senators, when they didn't meet in the Curia in the Forum, they met in temples, because it was pre-consecrated ground. And so that's probably what you have here too. The other thing is the Gaius and Lucius statue. This is something we talked about in the past. the nudity and whether it was set up in when they were still alive or after they died, because here we are on the Greek world. But this, the more I think about it, this is an official building, and it's in a Roman colony. So it probably followed more the Roman custom. And the fact that you have the Augustus toe gate, and he has a long sinus, which is indicative of later statues of Augustus. So it may have been set up at the same time after the death of Gaius, who died in 4, Lucius predeceased him in 2. So it may be more likely at that time. It's pretty clear that Gaius, when he was sent on his mission against the Parthians in 2 BC, and we have a lot of information about that, he stopped at various places en route. And Athens was one of them. You have the equestrian statues in the Agora there on top of the gateways of Gaius and Lucius. You also have the Neos Gaius inscription as well in Greek. So he undoubtedly, when he was in Athens, we have no evidence of him going to Corinth, but I suspect he went down to Corinth in 2 BC, and that may have been when the building was actually dedicated. That would make a lot of sense. And we don't know the name, as I recall, of this basilica, but it may have been called the Basilica Julia. And then after the death of Gaius and Lucius, the Basilica Gaia-LA on the parallel of the Basilica Julia in Rome, which was built under or started under Caesar in around 46, and then it was restored and rededicated in 10 AD and called the Basilica Gaia-LA, but it continued to be also called the Basilica Julia. So there may be something similar going on here. There may be a predecessor for what they did in Rome when they restored the Basilica in 12 AD.
You've brought up some very good points, John, and that another item to throw into the mix too is that it's at about this same time that the Isthmian Games are returned to Corinthian control at Isthmus, taking them back from Sicyon. Right. And so I would not be at all surprised. In fact, I'm very suspicious about Gaius coming through here, that this all kind of unfolded pretty much at the same time.
Right.
He's at Corinth, the games come back to Corinthian control, they start building this building and so on. So I think this is all just circumstantial, but I'm very, very suspicious.
Yeah, that's typical for Roman practice. Also, this construction that you have on screen reminds me of the same thing, this kind of like Deus or tribunal in Pompeii.
Yes, well, in fact, it's interesting you should mention Pompeii. Carl Friedrich Orr and I have been trading emails the past couple of weeks. There's this clique of Basilica people. But I'm very suspicious about this, John, because this article by Jean-Michel David was really quite convincing to me. And I am very suspicious if this did not become the venue for the imperial court for the province of Achaia. Now, yes, it's debated whether Corinth actually was the provincial capital. I'm one that believes it was. But if this is the case, and I'm going to come out with this in the monograph about the Southeast building, I am highly suspicious that it was here where Paul was brought to trial, not out in the forum.
The Bema,
Yes, and
I think
in part that's because where I'm going to offend some people here. I actually think Greek is a more elegant language than Latin. Okay, I said it. But there are a couple of times where, in fact, Latin has a more diverse vocabulary. Greek uses vima for both a rostra, public speaking place, like out on the forum, but also for a tribunal. And I really wonder if this, and not to give away what this monograph is, but it appears that after both the Southeast building and the Julian Basilica collapse, the Julian Basilica is abandoned. They rebuild the Southeast building in a basilica form, and they extend it northward, and they extend it just far enough to take in the tribunal. that makes me suspicious. And then I got even more suspicious that about 3 meters from this corner over here is an inscription that has been redated to the 6th century, which is when the Southeast building is rebuilt, that speaks specifically of the Church of Paul. Now, I don't know whether they're talking about a physical Church of Paul or sort of the metaphorical Church of Paul, but I'm highly suspicious. So.
Yeah.
Liz Carter, you had a question.
Yes, thanks, Paul. I really enjoyed your step-by-step reconstruction.
Oh, well, thank you.
I thought it was great, but I see this door behind the podium. Where does that lead? And is that how you got access to the podium?
Yes.
Was there a half story there or something
No,
like that?
this is, there are doorways on either side. The
Right.
adjacent Southeast building joined the Julian Basilica. And this has been identified, and this is from epigraphical evidence, that the Southeast building from the time of Augustus forward was the records hall for the colony. And so this was providing ready access between the Basilica and the records hall. What this is up a small flight of steps to get up on top of the dais. That's what this is here.
Thank you.
Sure.
And Lagatha has a question.
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed that. So the inscriptions that you showed were in Latin, but I'm assuming, were there also any in Greek? Like, were the Latin ones unusual? Which was more common for the Basilica, Greek?
Oh, okay. So this is a very interesting phenomenon in Corinth. It is roughly 90% of the epigraphical record in Corinth is in Latin up until the time of Hadrian. And then in Hadrian, it switches dramatically, the needle goes dramatically Greek. And it holds dominant Greek. It drifts back down, but then progressively Latin becomes rarer and rarer and rarer. So it is very much from the inception of the colony through the 1st century and into 2nd century, where it's Latin, it's not exclusively, but for the most part, Latin, 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 and then the Greek really kicks in. Something that I didn't mention, but you jogged my memory with this, is that there are a number of dedications in the Julian Basilica put up by the Agonothetes of the games at Isthmia. The Agonothetes was sort of the premier position you could hold in the colony of Corinth, the stage, the Isthmian games, and the Caesarean games, which get added on. The highest concentration in all of Corinth of those dedications by Agonothetes is in the Julian Basilica. So that makes me very suspicious too, that if we're running these games, it's now been co-opted that we're honoring the imperial family, and the guys who put them on, they pack all of their dedications into the Julian Basilica. Well, again, circumstantial, but I think it starts speaking louder and louder the more you see. But.
And by the way, the Latin inscriptions is further evidence for it being an official building, because it's a colonia.
Any other questions or comments? Those are the ones I'm seeing so far in the chat. Anybody else want to unmute and ask a question?
Can I ask a quick question?
Please go ahead, Dawn.
Please.
Okay, I definitely am not that well versed in the depth and the magnitude of antiquities pertaining to Greece, but I was just kind of curious, even though we know that Rome had jurisdiction at this time, would it be considered sacrilegious for any type of monument honoring previous Greek rulers? How would that have been interpreted? If, you know what I mean? Because I know we were, honoring, acknowledging Roman rulers, the jurisdiction, but I was just kind of curious, like, if they were to have monuments still trying to honor previous Greek rulers, how would that have been interpreted?
Well, I'm going to defer to John Pellini, who has become something of a specialist in this very subject. So.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not clear as to what you're getting at. Are you saying in effect that there would be like Greek monarchs who were represented at Corinth?
Yeah, I
here,
mean, obviously we're showing, obviously the Romans are showing their influence in terms of their, just their
Sure.
influence all in that area. But if there was per se any type of building where they try to relive the heyday of Greece and their sense of, hey, this is Greece, we're going to honor previous rulers, or how would that have been interpreted?
Corinth was destroyed in 146, and after that was nothing. So there wouldn't have been Greeks setting up a Hellenistic monarch setting up as they did in Athens, for example.
I apologize. I misunderstand what you were asking, Dawn. And the reason I pulled John in is because he has become a specialist in Christian destruction of antiquities. I thought that's where you were going. So no, I'm
okay.
Okay. Corinth.
Bad enough to have Paul in Corinth.
Yeah, this is further emphasizing how Corinth was Roman, and that is the neighboring Greeks were not fond of Corinth for quite some time. And Argos in particular took particular pride as being a thorn in the side of those darn Romans over the hill. So they weren't exactly welcomed with open arms from the start, and it took a long time. Okay,
because I was just kind of curious if and I got to remember the whole city-state thing, the individuality probably played a role in that, correct?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions that we can field today, or I should say Paul can field today?
Oh, yeah, I have a question. Why I wasn't clear on why you thought Gaius and Lucius would have been on the opposite side, that is on the north short side.
Oh,
it would seem more likely they would have flanked Augustus on either side.
It is that dedication to the Caesaribus Augustis, and that the locations of the two statues are meaningless. From where they were put, that's no indication of where they stood. That inscription, though, that is where it fell. And so I'm really curious if, and this is what Carolyn's conclusion was too, is that we should associate the inscription and Gaius and Lucius as one and the same. So I didn't show this because it was all speculative, but I've kind of sketched out a small little monument where they could stand, and they would have had two bays to themselves. So it would have been nowhere near as large as this, but it would have been kind of a nice framing element where you see them on the north looking towards
Yeah, the problem is that they were never called. They never had the appellation or the epithet Augustus. The Caesaribus Augustis would be referring to the emperors after, from Augustus on.
No, you're absolutely right. But I think Carolyn has made, to my mind, a pretty persuasive case that she has found a number of inscriptions that get right there, just right to the point, so it's.
But with Gaius and Lucius?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, I'll be interested.
So you'll have to read the book, John.
I will.
No, and I'm going to love to sit down and talk with you about this too. As you know, we've been talking about this subject for years.
Yep.
Well, along those lines, Paul, is this model going to have a life such that you can re-situ the statues and inscriptions in it as well? Well,
Aaron, I would love that. And I haven't asked Janet yet, but I think I'm about to. She, in an article that Andy Stewart published on the so-called Temple of Ares in the Agora in Athens, Janet did renderings for him, and she placed the statues on their statue bases in that drawing. I think it would be great if we could put these in here as well. So there's another project.
And do these color images show up in your excavation report?
Yes, they do. Yeah, I was able to secure a subvention grant from the AIA to pay for this. So And color is great, but it's expensive. I admire the journals that just as a matter of course are now publishing in color, but you pay to do that. But
Well, great.
and one thing I should mention is another shout out to Jana too, is that she used to show up with her laptop in my office and we would walk through this building in real time. And if I could find some way to make that possible and available online, I would, because you get an entirely different experience from this.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, there's some people in this audience here that could approach you about that. I think Diane Favreau is out there. So maybe you and Diane should have a conversation.
Well, that's right. The computer lab at UCLA. Yeah.
By the way, Paul, you had mentioned that the Gaia statue was found on its back. It seemed like it was buried.
Yes.
It obviously didn't fall. That was placed there.
Yes.
Because of the condition it was in. And in late antiquity, that's what they started to do, is to hide these images from the Christians, because the Christians would come in usually at night, destroy things, and whatever they had, the destroyed and the non-destroyed, they'd bury in what we call foisai, these sacral pits, to hide them from the fanatics.
See, I think that I agree. I think it was a deliberate act to save these statues. And I think Lucius was there. It's just that he had the bad luck of being found by robbers at a later date. And curiously enough, that Nero head, whichever Nero he may be, that was found in close proximity. And Nero remained a popular guy in Corinth. He did.
Yeah, but this is not Nero the Caesar. This is Germanicus most likely. He was thinking of maybe Nero Julius, the eldest son of Germanicus, but this is more likely to be the father Germanicus.
I think you're right, John. I do. Those ears are quite distinctive.
But they're all like that. When they have a toga, the ears come forward.
Yeah.
It has to do with the carving. It's kind of hard to carve ears with veil.
Well, Paul, I want to thank you for a wonderful talk. I want to also note that we'll try to get the URL from you for the online link to the publication itself and add that to the comments on the YouTube page where we will post this video. And again, please, everyone join me in thanking Paul Scotton for this talk.
Thank you for having me.
Delighted. I'll